Vincenzo Lancia and Claudio Fogolin founded Lancia C Automobile Fabrication in 1906. Their first car, the Type 51 Alpha, was on a 111-inch wheelbase and weighed just over 1,500 pounds. Its 2.5-liter inline-4 produced an impressive 28 horsepower, moving it to speeds in excess of 55 miles an hour. Being used for both road and track, more than 100 were made over the company's first couple of years, before being upgraded to a bigger 40 horsepower 3.8-liter 6 as the limited Di-Alpha, raising top speed to nearly 70. The Beta of 1909 was a bigger, more modern car than the Alpha, on a 115-inch wheelbase and 1,700 pounds, and using a 34 horsepower 3.1-liter 4, which would soon have a version manufactured in the U.S. at the Acme Motor Car Factory in Pennsylvania, and sold as the SGV, or Sternberg, Graham, and Vantine, the owners of the factory, but only for about 5 years. Meanwhile, actual Lancia car models were continuing through the Greek alphabet, with increasingly larger four-cylinder engines, which in 1915 included an expansion into commercial trucks. But the Lambda of 1922 may very well have been the most advanced car of the period. It was the first production car with unitized construction, and the first with a V4 engine, and it also included independent suspension and four-wheel brakes. More than 11,000 would be built over the next 10 years. The engine would increase from a 48 horsepower 2.1-liter to a 68 horsepower 2.6-liter, and the 3-speed would be replaced by a 4-speed, and a long wheelbase version would be added. Also introduced in 1922 was the Tri-Kappa, a limited production limousine, powered by a 98 horsepower 4.6-liter V8 on a 133-inch wheelbase, although less than 850 were made. And they would continue to expand their commercial truck offerings as well. Lancia would then abandon the Greek alphabet with their new models for 1931, moving to historical locations. The mainstream Artina, initially on a 118-inch wheelbase, 170 inches long, and using a 1.9-liter V4 with 55 horsepower, and the luxury Astura on a 125-inch wheelbase, using a 2.6-liter V8 with 72 horsepower. But the Depression and the expanding war in Europe had Lancia moving down market, first with the Aprilia in 1937, 156 inches long on a 108-inch wheelbase with a 1.4-liter V4. Then with the tiny Ardea in 1939, powered by a 900cc V4 with 26 horsepower, initially on a 96-inch wheelbase, 142 inches long and 1,700 pounds. But soon, longer wheelbase truck and taxi versions would also be offered. And after the war, the first production 5-speed was offered. More than 32,000 would be made, with Lancia becoming fairly dependent on commercial sales after the war. But soon they would be moving back up market, with the Aurelia of 1950, 174 inches long on a 113-inch wheelbase, and weighing 2,500 pounds. It sported a rear 4-speed transaxle, and it was the first mass-produced V6 car, initially a 1.8-liter producing 56 horsepower. Soon they would return to racing, but only for a short time, and the Ardea would be replaced by the Appia. With the new Big Flaminia of 1957, the rear transaxle and V6 carried over, now up to 2.5 liters. But Lancia gave up their traditional suspension for a more conservative double wishbone design. The executive Flavia of 1961 saw even more changes, using a flat 4 to power the front wheels, while the smaller Fulvia 2 years later was also front-wheel drive, but retained a V4. A narrow-angle dual-overhead cam unit with a single head, mounted at a 45-degree angle. A car that would help them once again return to racing, this time on the rally circuit. But Lancia was losing money, leading to a takeover by Fiat in 1969. Almost immediately, the Flaminia would be discontinued without a replacement, but the next Flavia was already in development and would arrive in 1971 as the 2000. Soon, Lancia badged trucks would go away, and model names would return to their Greek origins, starting with the entry-level Beta of 1972, which also saw the move to an inline-4, a 1.6-liter dual-overhead cam engine with 99 horsepower and 95 pound-feet of torque, in a car that was 169 inches long on a 100-inch wheelbase and weighed 2,400 pounds. It would also be the car that brought Lancia back to the U.S. But perhaps more significant would be the mid-engine Stratos sports car the following year. It was 146 inches long on an 86-inch wheelbase and around 2,000 pounds, using a 2.4-liter Ferrari Dino V6, producing up to 190 horsepower and street trim. A car that could do 145 miles an hour, get to 60 in 5.5 seconds, and do the quarter mile in just over 14. Less than 500 were produced, but over its 5 years it would win several rally and road racing championships. But it was not alone. It was joined in 1975 by the Monte Carlo, called the Scorpion in the U.S. due to the Chevy Monte Carlo already being sold here. Another mid-engine car, this one using a 118 horsepower 2-liter inline-4, or an 81 horsepower 1.8-liter in the U.S. It was 150 inches long on a 91-inch wheelbase and 2,100 to 2,300 pounds, a bit more common with nearly 8,000 being made, adding more championships to Lancia's win list. But the modifications to meet U.S. regulations were said to have ruined the car. Mainstream models continued reviving names from the Greek alphabet, with the Executive Gamma in 1976 as both a coupe and a berlina, and a smaller hatchback was introduced in 1979 as the Delta, although Lancia pulled out of the U.S. again in 1982 due to poor sales. And the 80s would see several other changes, including the Beta being canceled, although there would be a notchback version of the Delta called the Prisma, and there would be an all-new executive sedan called the Thema that shared its platform with the Fiat Chroma, Alfa Romeo 164, and Saab 9000. The new models would continue to be developed along with other Fiat divisions, but names would regularly be changed with redesigns. The Prisma became the Dedra and then the Libra. The Thema became the Kappa and then the Thesis. The new Zeta minivan would get restyled as the Fedra, and the A112 that had been sold as Lancias in some markets became the Y10, and by the time it became the Ypsilon in 1995, most were being sold as Lancias, a model that would soon be carrying Lancia, along with a revived Delta. Starting in 2007, Lancia would start sharing its models with Chrysler, the Chrysler 300 as the Thema, the 200 as the Flavia, and the Voyager as the Voyager, while the Delta and Ypsilon would be sold with Chrysler badging in some markets. But after Fiat and Chrysler merged in 2014, only the Ypsilon, last restyled in 2011, remained. Another merger in 2021 with Peugeot hasn't seen any new developments so far, but there have been promises of new models appearing over the next few years, most likely electric. But as that market is not meeting expectations, manufacturers are rethinking their future product lines. So we'll see what happens. As always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment below and like and subscribe.